All right, so we will call the meeting to order, and Kathy, will you do the honors?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. A few housekeeping items for tonight's Zoom meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you are not speaking. The chat function of this public meeting is disabled. All chats will go directly to me. All board members on Zoom, please keep your video on, and all others keep your video off unless you are participating during the meeting. If you're having any trouble, you can send me a chat. And then the city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. And now I'll turn the meeting back to you.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to just start with introductions. We'll each introduce ourselves, and at this point just say a few things about what you're passionate about, what sort of things that you hope to focus on within this board. So would you like to start?
I'm Dave Johnson. I'm CEO of Pinnacle Technology. My background is electrical engineering. So I guess I'm mostly interested in learning more, and if I can contribute, I'm certainly happy to.
Great.
Great, yeah, so my name is Josh Roundy. I'm a professor at KU in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. My passion is all things environmental, but my actual research area is in the water side, so water sustainability on that, and a lot of other climate modeling, climate projection stuff, so.
And some of the city staff saw you just, I think, yesterday presenting.
At the Governor's Water Conference.
I got a text, hey, isn't this person on the new city's board? And I was like, yes.
So I was, I
So they
presented
heard you,
yesterday
your
at the
presentation.
water. Yep.
Awesome.
So that's sort of what I do, and yeah, happy to be here.
Great, Josh.
Hi, my name is Chloe Chaffin, they, she. I am a MPA student at KU, so I am new to Lawrence as of this summer, so I'm here to learn a little bit more about our city government. And I care about all things environmental, but certainly I would say transportation is a special interest of mine.
Great. Okay, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Chris Reimer, calling in from a work trip, but my background is in development and geography. So my interests are primarily in equitable policies, and my particular work currently is in environmental justice spaces. So making sure that the work we're doing at the government is reaching communities that need it most. So.
Great. Well, I'm Nancy Muma, and I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology at KU. And one of my focus for environmental work is plastic toxicity. So that's part of what I had done as research. And so plastic reduction is important to me. We also just started a company to improve heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, to reduce reliance on natural gas and oil for heating and cooling homes. It's the most efficient way to do it. So, yeah. All right.
And we are missing 2 board members tonight, just FYI.
Okay. All right. The next item is to consider the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Any comments on the meeting minutes? No? Do I hear somebody make a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
Motion to approve.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Hi.
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay. All right. All right, the next thing is public comment. Public can speak on any issue except those that are on the schedule for the agenda. Don't see any public here. Do we have any online?
Does not look like it. Nope, no one's joined.
No? All right. Then the next item on the agenda is the review of the former Sustainability Advisory Board pending items. So pull that up. So we had a few things that we were able to resolve in the last section. We, of course, everybody knows we worked on and had proposed the single-use plastic bag ban. We reviewed and made recommendations on the Douglas County Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, and reviewed and made recommendations on the Sustainable Capital Projects Policy, which was adopted. One of the things that we were working on a lot, but were not able to get through, was a weed and sustainable landscaping ordinance. And this was something that was championed by Ben Sykes, who was the former chair of the Sustainability Advisor Board and the subcommittee champion. And he worked with a number of people, Terry Wilkie, Mike Allman, Don Hawkins, Courtney Masterson, Catherine Morse, and Karen Pagel-Miners, who all worked on this ordinance. Basically, the weed ordinance hasn't changed since 1979, and as you can imagine, a lot of things have changed since then. And there were 3 major revisions that they were working on. One was to change the noxious weed list, so what weeds are prohibited, and to have that align better with what's going on in the county and the state. So a lot of counties surrounding Douglas County, as well as Douglas County, have made updates and revisions to the noxious weed list such that it would be important to try to align Lawrence's weed ordinance with that. Also to revise the violation procedures to make them a little bit more environmental justice. What would you say? I guess that's the best approach. And then to promote sustainable native landscaping to enhance resilience, resistance to climate change, improve stormwater mitigation, resilience to extreme weather, and to improve pollinator habitat. So there are a lot of KPIs in the strategic plan and in Plan 2040, which this ordinance would address. So it is not out of alignment with the sorts of things that we should be thinking about. And the City Commission did accept the recommendations in December of 2022, but they gave us feedback that they wanted some changes and put some into the land development code revisions, if I have this right, and to engage a broader group of stakeholders. And there was a lot of work towards that. There was engagement with, let's see, Kansas Public Radio, in particular Celia Lopez-Jepson, and some outreach to surrounding areas, I believe. But we are still not having any, we haven't had any updates to the ordinance, and so that is something that we could be working on to continue to improve this weed and native planting issue. Do you have anything to add that I didn't cover with that, Kathy?
The only thing I will say is that during the city commission meeting for this week, they did take action on the land development code update. So I do know that there were some meetings, like one-on-one meetings with Ben and others from that subcommittee and planning staff and the consultant, and a lot of the content did not make it to the land development code. That was approved last night.
Okay, so there is still some things that could be improved upon in that area?
Yeah, I'm just saying that the action of getting all of those components into land development code update, so it didn't go on there.
Okay.
Like and the commission has already taken action on the draft that was presented this week.
Okay, all right.
Nancy, would you pull that tabletop microphone closer to you, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Couldn't hear me well?
Well, not well, it's better now.
Okay. All right, so that was one of the major things that had been worked on in the past that is still open. So do you want to now address some of the KPI strategic plan?
We can move on to the next agenda item. So, we talk a lot about the city's strategic plan, and I just wanted to make sure I understand kind of what level you're all feeling about understanding with the strategic plan. We talked about it a little bit during the first meeting, and I don't know if you got a chance to look at the recording or not. You did? Okay, awesome. And I know you've looked at it on your own. I know you've heard the city manager talk about the strategic plan. I know Nancy's comfort level with the strategic plan. She's had lots of presentations and conversations regarding the strategic plan. But for the four of you, number one is, how comfortable do you feel with it? Do you understand it? What questions do you have that I can address? So I really want to get to the point of, like, if you do have some questions or concerns about it or not quite understanding, I want to be able to help navigate those through. So.
I can comment. So I think from my perspective, I think I get the big ideas. I don't know a lot of the details, but I feel like as we run into details, I will ask more questions when that happens, right? It's kind of hard to know exactly what detailed aspects I need to ask questions about now, but I think I get the good overview of how things are set up. And
The framework.
yeah.
Okay, awesome.
I'm still trying to figure out what the acronyms mean. So when you say a KPI or whatever, I'm starting to understand that this is an initiative or a milestone or something, although I don't remember what it means. So
Key performance indicator.
Yeah.
there you go. It's a milestone.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you, I have not, you've got the ADAPT program, you've got the ordinance 9477, I think. You've got various things. I don't have a good feel at all for how these things overlap. So, yeah, I'm very much learning at this point.
Okay.
But as, I guess from my point of view, when we get to the point where you point us in a direction and say, okay, here's the task at hand, then we can get at that. But yeah, right now, I'm very much learning.
Okay, awesome. How about you, Chloe?
I would say about the same. I'm sure I will have questions. I don't know what they are exactly yet. I feel like I'm a 7 out of 10 on my understanding. Same. I feel like I got the big ideas. I just haven't read too many, of these strategic planning documents before. I have experience on nonprofit board of directors. I've never served on like a city local government kind of advisory board, so it's just a learning curve for me, but it's interesting. It's a lot of things that I'm still trying to piece together.
All right. Chris?
Yeah, same. I understand the roadmap. I understand how all of the different priorities overlap and the KPIs. It's just getting into the details once you have action items for us.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, it sounds like you all feel comfortable with the framework of the strategic plan. So there's mission, vision, the organizational values, and then the two big areas are the outcomes and the commitments. And just a reminder, environmental sustainability is one of the commitments. You are the only commitment advisory board that was created. All the others fall under outcomes. So as the commission and the community was trying to reorganize and restructure our advisory boards and commissions and stuff. So again, this is the only advisory board that falls under one of those commitments. And then this board does overlap with each one of the outcomes on all KPIs. So there's not one KPI, key performance indicator. Sometimes you'll hear it say key progress indicator. There's not one KPI that is just work for environmental sustainability. You're always paired up with somebody. So I just want to, and I think I drove that message home last time, like when we're talking about, the city's renewable energy goals, that is something that you are going to share with the Connected City Advisory Board, right? So I just wanted to mention that really quick. I do also want to say, because there is some movement happening, and I want to mention this to you all. So the way that our strategic plan shows up on our website, and how, those KPIs, the measurements show up, are starting to change. Most of them have changed in our outcome groups. There are some commitments where it still needs to go to the new format. So the city signed up with a software system called Achieve It, which is the new kind of platform where we're going to be submitting our data for it to produce and pull some graphs to display on our website. So we've heard comments from the public for a while about how hard it is to navigate through some of these, and how they were displayed before. So I just wanted to mention that. I'll go ahead and click on Strong Welcoming Neighborhoods just so you can see one of the ones that has been updated. So this is what it's gonna look like in some of those measurements. The one thing I will say, and we're working on some of these as we move forward with the change, but you'll probably get confused with some outcomes where there have been KPIs that have been either changed or added to this, outcome group, and or eliminated. So the numbering system kind of gets a little wonky through some of these. So if you see that, or just know that we're working through that. The other thing is that in this new format, it doesn't say what this outcomes overlapped commitment is. The other one used to say, whether it was environmental sustainability or equity and inclusion and so forth. So you're not going to see that pairing on here. But I wanted to show you that. And then I wanted to just go back over here to our commitments.
Just for my own edification, what's an SWN?
SWN is just Strong Welcoming Neighborhoods. Connected City would be CC.
Oh, I got it, you just asked.
Yeah, there's just that, yeah. Good question, though. And there might be a different way that these get numbered, so, just be aware that there's changes happening as we speak, so. I'm clicking on environmental sustainability page. Some of you have probably already come here. This is the old format of how it was displaying. So this one has not switched over to the new. So I just wanted to kind of show you in comparison. These orange cones are just cones, are just a placeholder of saying, we haven't quite figured out the data calculation for the KPI, so it's not on here. On here too, when you look at what's showing up on environmental sustainability, and then you compare, UI is unmistakable identity, so that first outcome. So when you compare it, you'll see that they have the new revised KPI, which is number of events and programs that celebrate and enhance area environmental sustainability. So there's been a change there. I also will let you know that as we have been maybe making some minor changes to some, when we have deleted or added new KPIs, those still need to go to City Commission. So you might see some of them showing up on the website because Achieve It has already pulled that one and it's directing it to the website. But just know that we're still going to be presenting these changes to our City Commission, who ultimately is who approves the strategic plan and major changes like that. The other thing I will mention too, in this old format, we had like at the bottom strategies of how you would move the needle on a KPI. You'll hear that a lot, like how are we going to move the needle on this KPI? So staff in the community had at one point started to, write down, what could possibly help move, move progress in one of these KPIs. I don't think that completely got finished So there's still a lot more work to do in, identifying what those strategies are and what the activities are under it. Usually it's, and what interests you all, it's like what policy could be implemented that will really, drive some positive change to this KPI, move it forward. So sometimes it has to do with the policy, and I'll go to one here at the bottom just to give you, I think I gave this example last time, but I will push it forward again. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy. CC14 is that number of public infrastructure projects that account for climate adaptation. So Nancy had mentioned that the former board had reviewed the staff document, which was the policy we wanted to move forward to commission, called the Sustainable Capital Projects Policy. That policy was put in place to address utilizing green rating systems for infrastructure projects. Otherwise, how do you measure something like this, right? So, and that speaks to when the city is going to be building a new facility, the policy says that it will be a LEED Gold certified facility. So that's the sustainability rating system for buildings. When it's infrastructure, not building, but some of our utility work, et cetera, and it's over $2 million project, that is going to go through the Envision verification. Envision is kind of like LEED. It's like a checklist of all these things that you could get points towards when you consider the environment and some sustainability factors that will then gain us that level of verification for infrastructure projects. There's still no data because from the staff bringing it to the former Sustainability Advisory Board to getting, their kind of, edits and then approval. And we went in front of City Commission and, we got direction that, we were headed the right way. And then we came back to Commission with the final document for them to review and approve. So that still sets itself up for not effective when they approved it, but the next cycle where a budget had not yet been decided because the budget is impacted by this policy. There's a lot more investment up front for LEED certification and Envision, but hopefully the city will get, return an investment with the savings of, the utility bills are not going to be as high and so forth. So this one was effective January 1st. And currently there are several projects that are undergoing this, the new policy is being applied to those projects. So we'll be able to, at the end of the year, report on this. But this is very new. But again, it's very exciting because this is an example of, we had some strategies. We were just wondering, like, what could we do to really put something into place that would, give us that measurement and really get us to be working on our infrastructure projects, our buildings and such, in a way that it does account for climate adaptation. So that was important. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. Any questions?
Yeah, so all of the other ones that have like the little cone, the data is in development, are they all kind of like that where it's just they're waiting for data, or are there some where like we have the data, it's just going to take a while for the website to update? And if so, like what's the timeline for all of that being revisualized on there to the public?
Sure. Yeah, they're all, let me go to another cone just to make sure, we're talking about the same. Okay, so this one's not exactly the same as the other one. The other one is waiting, like obviously there's a policy that's been passed, which is great. That's gonna, be the driver of that, that KPI. And for this SWN 12, the reason why there's no data there is because we have been trying to, this not data that's just readily available. There are a whole bunch of folks, not in, my headspace, but in the GIS and, the mapping world that are trying to identify what those what the land like that would qualify for this KPI. And by the way, this one has a little bit of tweaking change as well, because we're going to match it to our Lead for Cities requirement. Lead for Cities is something else that the city is going through. It's also like a sustainability rating for cities. So somebody like Johnson County is a Lead for City, even though it's a county, gold standard. Kansas City, Missouri just announced about a year and a half ago that they're also at the gold standard for Lead for Cities. So all that's happening with this one is, again, that it's taking a little bit of time to gather what it is that we're going to identify that counts towards this KPI, and then we can produce those numbers.
Yeah.
So it's not waiting for a policy, nothing like that, like the other one is, but it definitely is waiting for the finalization of data and agreement on what qualifies under this one. There were some disagreements between some of the groups working on this of what would qualify. And so we have gone ahead, and this is why we want to match it to the Lead for Cities, because it has a very detailed definition of what like that environmental sustainable uses would be.
Yeah, that's, I mean, totally understandable. That's going to take some time, but is there just like a timeline estimate on like when they think those things will, or I mean, I'm sure there's like, as the disagreements come up, that might get shifted, but.
Yeah, that's a good question too, because something that we talk about a lot, and I know the former Sustainability Advisory Board members have heard this before, is that, I mean, some of these groups like environmental sustainability or equity and inclusion, I mean, we have, you know, over 15 KPIs, sometimes 20, some of these groups have. So we can't move the needle on that many KPIs all at the same time. So some KPIs get prioritized over others. This one has not been prioritized.
Sure. Okay.
So that's why also the data is lagging some, right? So we are commitment groups with the outcome groups. Really, we talk and we decide which ones we really want to move the needle on. I mean, which one do we want to take to the commission to get a policy passed, or something else that's significant that's going to take a lot of work to move forward. So yeah, this one in particular has not been prioritized at this time. It might be, and some groups kind of see it as like, what can we accomplish in 2024? Which ones would be a 2025? Which ones would be 2026? Which, by the way, would be a similar type of process that this board would want to take. You know, a board like this cannot take on 15 different initiatives. You got to narrow it down, right? And you got to match it up with what staff is working on too. You know, like that would make sense, right? We're helping each other, move the needle on these KPIs. So that's just something to consider, that we just can't do them all at the same time. Mm-hmm. There's over 100 KPIs in total.
Do you ever, it sounds like everything that this committee is being asked to do is going to be within the framework of the strategic plan. But one of the things I noticed in listening to your presentation is both, I think it was Commissioner Sellers and a number of people from the audience were concerned about the idea that in trying to meet some renewable goals, basically what we were doing was buying offsets. And do you ever tackle a problem like that? Because that's addressable. I mean, either you're paying too much money so that Evergy can pocket it and nothing's happening, or you are paying extra money to support the development of wind energy in Kansas. One of those things is true, and that should be fairly easy to dig up the information on that. And now you can answer a question. It doesn't fit in a hole somewhere, but it's a question that people have. You know, are we, because if all we're doing is spending extra money to give Evergy some extra cash, that's not useful. But if what the city is doing is spending extra money, knowing, of course, that you're not getting just wind turbine energy, but that you are supporting the development of wind energy, and there are measurable increases in the amount of wind energy in the state of Kansas put in by Evergy because of these programs. Then you can go back and you can say to Commissioner Sellers or whatever, yeah, this is exactly what's happening. and we are supporting, and there is additional. But, quite honestly, as somebody who isn't paying much attention right now, I haven't heard of much new wind development in a while in Kansas. There was a flurry of wind development, and then it kind of stopped. And there aren't that many places where, you have the resource, and where you do, it tends to be right in the middle of the Flint Hills where you don't necessarily want to be doing that. So fundamental, simple questions like that. Is the city wasting money? Or is the city making a commitment to the development of wind energy in Kansas, and is that working? I mean, it seems like something that's on people's minds. But that's not something that's in the purview of kind of what's going on here.
Yeah, so before we switch to the presentation, which I know is part of agenda item number 2, I just want to make sure, are there any other questions, or what would be helpful for me to bring forward? Yeah, go ahead.
Kathy, I have a question.
Yeah.
For all of these KPIs, are the methodologies used to measure and track publicly available or not? Like, I'm looking at CC11 and the environmental sustainability on residents using non-automobile means of transportation to work. And I'm sure there are many people, including myself, that are curious about how that's getting measured. So I'm just curious.
The metrics and information, the data behind these is not publicly available at this time.
Or I guess even just a description on the methodology to come to this measurement. So like where they're collecting the data, who they're collecting the data from, how often are they collecting the data. That would be, that's not anywhere. We would have to have a separate conversation.
Yeah, it is not currently on the city's website. It is something that we have asked, especially with the new format, if we can add additional information that would, kind of a parentheses or just an extra block of text that would give a little bit more information as for that KPI and where the data is coming from. But at this time, it is not a function that is available. So, but it is something that's been asked a lot, Chris, so I appreciate the question because, I mean, again, that brings attention to the fact that people want to drill down a little bit more. Some people don't. Some people are like, this is overwhelming and I don't want to see this much. Other people really do want to drill down and understand the data a little bit more. So I appreciate you bringing it up. Any other questions before we transition?
Yeah, I have a question, but first just a comment, because I would be curious in that, because, I work remotely, and so I'm kind of also, I would be maybe suspicious about, like, whether or not that gets counted as, me walking from my bedroom to my office, and so there's things like that where I can definitely see how that, like, in the rise, post-pandemic, I would wonder if that would be a thing that would come to my mind, but that's just a quick comment there. That's why I would also like to see the methodology. But my question, not to like take us away from this too much directly, but just like I said, I'm new to Lawrence, and so I don't know the history, but I do know that this is like a new advisory board. So with you saying that we are the only one that is commitment focused as opposed to outcomes, before that, like restructuring, what was like the skew between commitment and outcome? And then also like, where does the prioritization of the city like go between those differences of the way that those advisory boards are set up?
Yeah, good question. And back to where the data comes from. So it sounds like there's interest from this board to maybe, for me to bring back at a future meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Just a little bit of, context about where the data is coming from and how it's calculated and that type of stuff. And
I think, Kathy, I guess, in addition, though, my concern is also from an accountability standpoint for the city. So the public having that transparency of here is the methodology for each of these, I think is critical. So I just don't want it to only go to us, ideally. So flagging that too.
Yeah, I understand that, and your comment, and I thank you for bringing this up. I will go ahead and pass it along. That's not something that, I'll be able to add to the website myself, but I will
Oh, yeah, I get it,
definitely
I get
let
it.
the team know that that is something that is important. But in the meantime, I could provide a little bit more of a drill down information for this board as we talk more about the strategic plan and KPIs that we might want to work on together to move the needle on.
Okay.
Okay. And now, Chloe, back to your item. So, get me back to your.
Yeah, so just before the restructuring, how many were commitment versus outcome? What is the prioritization between the two?
Sure. So prior to the restructure, the boards were not aligned to commitments and outcomes.
Okay.
It was just boards that had been created within the last 40 plus
Sure.
years. Every time there was something new, there was a new board created or a new commission or a new, so it ended up being that the city had over 40 different advisory boards and commissions and councils. And so the task was, and I can give you some of that background information, like the reports and stuff. So the task was they created a new committee, so a committee on committees, to tackle this for a year, just kind of go through to see how they would maybe find alignment between some of the groups and the outcomes and commitments, like really truly just bring it to strategic plan focus. There are some advisory boards and commissions that were not part of this restructuring because they have some other importance or some other alignment with, some sort of law that it needed to be created for a certain reason. And so those were set aside, as well as the boards that were not only for the city, but they were city-county boards or city and other entity boards. Those were left alone as well. The others were realigned. So they were all realigned to the concept was under outcomes, because all of those boards still have to consider every single commitment in what they're putting forward, right? So the commitments don't get forgotten. It's just the acknowledgement that as outcome is the work that the city's in the business to do. So whether you're staff working on an outcome or whether you're an advisory board working on an outcome, you have to consider the 6 commitments in your work. So that's why there's going to be some overlap. The Connected City or Unmistakable Identity boards are going to be talking about environmental sustainability during their meetings because some of those KPIs fall within those areas. So the city, that restructure did not show this advisory board as one to, be formed. But that was overturned from the city commission. They really thought, they heard public comment and they really thought that it was important to keep an environmental sustainability advisory board. Understanding that there's overlap with the others, but that this board could really help and work with those other boards. That doesn't mean that equity and inclusion isn't as important or that engage and empower teams isn't as important or sound fiscal stewardship is not as important. It's not about that. It's just this one seemed to fit for them to continue.
Gotcha. Thank you. That helps.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Switching over to the presentation on October 8th, did you all get a chance to see that recording? Yeah. Okay. And I know you had just kind of highlighted one of the things in that that was of question. So the way I presented the information for that ordinance and kind of that city has in the past, said we've checked off that first goal, that 2025 goal, because we are, what we have with Evergy is the power purchase agreement, which is different than like house residents who purchase or pay a little bit more for that investment on wind energy or solar. They're signed up to those programs. Ours is a power purchase agreement, which means there is a wind farm that is producing the amount of electricity that we're using, and we get a certificate of, that amount of electricity that we are purchasing from Evergy, from the wind. So they can't sell it to somebody else. It's not just putting money for an investment for other wind farms, but we're actually purchasing from that wind farm. The only reason why, and there's, everybody sees it a little bit different, but the only reason why I, in my presentation, mentioned that it is considered somewhat of an offset is because the way that, we're powered right now, there isn't renewable energy available around the clock, right? So the wind energy is going to be produced during a certain time of the day, and maybe they're shut off for a couple days, and it produces a lot, in the following days or so forth. In order to truly be, that one-on-one that we're using and we're taking from the wind farm, we would need to make sure that this is a system that would provide us renewable energy 24/7, which is the conversation of 24/7 battery storage, right? Some utilities do have battery storage, and that has the ability to, again, as they're producing renewable energy, they're selling it to, that one customer that has the power purchase agreement. Either way, it was really a question and ask of direction from the commission, because some of them feel like we have checked off the box. We've done our part for making sure that we have this power purchase agreement in place, so that we are getting those credits from that wind farm for our electricity use. Others feel like we need to do more, right? So, because if we check off the box, then why are we still talking about putting solar on city facilities and so forth, right? Well, that is an important part too. We want to be able to have renewable energy on site as well. Maybe it's just going to offset, 20% of the electricity of that facility. We have some solar right now, but very little in some of our facilities, and very small arrays. So not anything of big significance, but like Central Station that Transit just built and is now in operations, that has solar panels and is offsetting part of their electricity use. And we're going to continue to invest if that's what the commission wants. And it sounded like, like that is part of it as well. It's not just stopping at power purchase agreement. It's also how can we, generate our own renewable energy and focus on that. So I hope that helps, but really the intent of that presentation, and I'll ask you if you have any questions. The intent of that presentation was, and I spoke about it with the former Sustainability Advisory Board, is that ordinance needs some edits. Some are, very straightforward edits. It talks about Sustainability Advisory Board. That advisory board doesn't exist anymore. Like, there are some things like that need to be edited. But in addition, we wanted to talk about those goals. We just had the City Commission adopt the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. That is a county-wide plan that Nancy mentioned, that former Sustainability Advisory Board also was very involved with, serving on a steering committee. Nancy served on the steering committee for that. There was a committee of the Sustainability Advisory Board that focused on it. So there was a lot of activity and lots of presentations to the actual full board as well. So now that we have that in place, is how do we better align our goals, to that county-wide goals sometimes, and this was a comment that's been given, in the past, is because we want it to be relatable to the whole county. Sometimes it feels a little bit disappointing to Lawrence, because Lawrence wants to move, much faster sometimes, that kind of feeling. I mean, just to be honest, there was a lot of those type of comments. Nothing within this plan keeps us at just doing, the minimum that it's asking for. We can go way ahead of this, right? We can take it where we want to, but the idea is really, you know, at the end of the day is really just making sure that we get to the goal of the total goal of that climate action plan, which is countywide to go, you know, climate neutral by 2050. You know, can City of Lawrence and can our ordinance say that we're going to do it by 2040? Absolutely, we can go much faster than that timeline if we wanted to, but make it relatable. That was a question of one of the commissioners, like how do we align to that plan? You mentioned too, there's all these plans and goals, how do they work together? I think we're in that time frame right now that some of this stuff has passed and some of it is being opened for reconsideration of some edits, is like, let's make it all make sense, how it aligns to the strategic plan, how it aligns to our goals, et cetera. And let it not be confusing. If we have 3 different goals, like energy goals out there, like one that's in climate action plan, one that's in ordinance, one that's, it's confusing to the public. They're gonna be like, what is the one that matters? And why are you speaking on all these different, you know, goals? It's confusing to folks. So we just wanna make sure that we're intentional in how we work through this. The ordinance 9744, the commission did direct city staff to work on some edits to that ordinance and to work with the 2 boards, Environmental Sustainability Advisory Board and Connected City Advisory Board, to kind of get it to a final state and bring it back to commission for their, you know, review, edits, et cetera, and questions. So that's kind of where we are with that.
Were there specific recommendations on that they wanted?
They ended up really just leaving it open,
Okay.
right? So they did not direct staff that this goal needs to change to this goal, or it's a power purchase agreement, check, that's it, that's exactly what, no, they didn't put any of those specific markers on the ordinance. They also, just so you know, they also did not specify a time frame, but we don't want this to drag on 2 years, or, you know, that's not the intent either. So we do want to do it in a timely fashion, but we want to coordinate your 2 boards, right? So that we can really come out with a good, or a revised ordinance that we all feel pretty comfortable with moving forward. So again, they definitely lent their support of, you know, of us all working on this together to put something out there that makes a little bit more sense. That's a little bit clearer. I don't know if you have read that ordinance. It doesn't have a whole lot of content or context to it. It does not tell us how we're going to get to that goal. There's no pathway to it. There was a sentence in there that how we were going to achieve this goal was through the climate action and adaptation plan. We know that that is not, that plan is not a pathway with how Lawrence gets to this goal. Yeah. So that is very clear now that climate action and adaptation plan kind of went a different direction. And it would have been very, very narrow-minded to think that a climate action and adaptation plan would only speak to energy, right? There's a lot more to climate action than energy. So, so anyway, that's kind of where we're at. Any questions that you had from viewing that presentation and hearing the commission or the public talk about it?
You did a very nice job presenting it. So.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Mm-hmm. Just so you all know too, those type of presentations happen throughout every month throughout the commission meetings, where it's either an outcome or a commitment presenting. We use the work sessions. Again, work sessions are not a space for the city commission to vote on anything. It is really just an opportunity for us to share an update or to share, something we're working on that we need a little bit of direction from them on. So it's a good space to be in. And I did want to mention one more thing before we transition. But one of the other components to this energy conversation and renewable energy, so this is particular to CC12, is the KPIs, CC12, just so you all know. Let me go down to it. It's right here, it's just separated between electric, natural gas, and fleet. I don't know if you heard the fleet presentation, that was also that same night. And they did present to the former Sustainability Advisory Board first before they went to commission. But it's also interesting to listen to. But the other component of this CC12, which is, again, there was a policy already in place with city goals on renewable energy, but we asked for that ordinance to be, opened up so we could edit and work on it together. The other component is that we had a lot of work and we had budget set aside to do a fleet transition plan, which is the result of that fleet transition plan is what the presentation was. We haven't had any budget yet to do a full analysis of our facilities. So what would it take to electrify our city facilities, right, to remove the natural gas component? What would it take, what's the feasibility of putting solar on our city facilities? And a little bit even more basic, the city of Lawrence doesn't have an energy plan. There are a lot of cities and counties that have an energy manager on staff, and they have energy plans. Energy plans are very detailed reports on, energy that identify energy efficiency in facilities, that run facility audits, and really kind of give the big picture of our energy use. Because before we purchase more electricity or more renewable energy, we want to make sure that the strategy is to reduce energy consumption by the city, right? That should always come first in any of these conversations, is how do we reduce our energy consumption? And then how do the energy that we are consuming, how can we make sure that that's renewable energy? So that's a key component. So we haven't had that full study, but we have been working on our EECBG grant application. The city was allotted $147,530 is the total amount. And we did submit our application, and actually today we received our congratulations email from the DOE, so the Department of Energy, and that amount of funding is going to go towards technical assistance. The city will be matched up. DOE is going to match us up with a group that is going to help us with the 3 deliverables. So an energy plan for the city, feasibility study on solar for our city facilities, and also a study on how we could electrify our facilities. So that is going to give us some really great data that we don't have right now. We've been talking about these goals, and we always want to improve, but we also need to understand where our usage is. If we have been good about reducing, we did some work in the past, but it's been a while since we, replaced some windows and some of the facilities, and, we're currently not tracking all that data. We need to figure out a system that is going to track all the city facilities' energy use data, and, it should be, even available to the public in some sort of format, in a dashboard or whatnot. That's another thing with the goal too, is people want to see, if you have a goal, where are you in the goal? Like, how far are you? And then, the strategic plan kind of does that a little bit, but doesn't provide a lot of information, like background information on what the city's been working on.
Does that funding include looking at heating, going beyond natural gas and do something like heat pumps, either air source or ground source heat pumps to increase efficiency? Because they're the most efficient way to heat and cool buildings and provide hot water. So-
Yeah, that would be all part of that energy plan, for sure.
Great.
Yeah.
Good.
So it is pretty exciting to be, moving forward with some of this work that we've wanted to prioritize, we've wanted to have this data, it's just, again, budget. So this was a pot of money that we were very hopeful that we could use towards this. A lot of communities have used their EECBG funding for replacing their HVAC in their city hall or purchasing 2 electric vehicles. The city of Lawrence, we felt very strongly that we didn't want kind of a one and done type of situation. So, we could have purchased 2 electric vehicles and that would have been great, right? We want to get there. We want to increase the amount of electric vehicles we have, but it's not something that keeps giving. Having an energy plan in place with these feasibility studies as well are going to help us for future grant applications and also for the decisions that we need to make. You probably heard, if you did watch that fleet transition plan presentation, that there are currently not options for some of our heavy-duty vehicles, and there was talk about potentially, like if we still want to do something that's a little bit better than the status quo right now, that we could go with compressed natural gas vehicles and build that infrastructure. Somebody from a former Sustainability Advisory Board member had asked, well, what if the biggest impact for us right now would be putting that money towards the facilities? Like, what if that is actually what's gonna be better than to, do this middle step that takes us to a little bit better place, but not to the ultimate goal? So I thought that was a great comment that was brought up, and that is what we're trying to achieve in making sure we have all the data we need to make those decisions and then figure out how we're going to get there to our goals.
Now, with the electricity, you're talking about 100% power from renewable sources. Most people talk about net zero rather than 100%. So is that something that's been considered?
Absolutely. That was brought up in my presentation about net zero. Yeah, no. Yeah. This is great. I'm so glad that, we're, again, if we're all kind of thinking about the same thing, we need to explore some of these different ways to get to still a positive outcome, but not necessarily that 100% renewable energy that we kind of kept feeling, we're just, it felt like an impossible goal a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you think about that natural gas sector, how do you get there? Because there's not like an equivalent of available equivalent
there
for
is.
renewable.
Yes, there is. That's the heat pumps. So you get rid of gas completely. So we're going to net zero in my house. No gas. Can't do 100% resourced, because in the wintertime you don't make enough electricity. But net zero with no natural gas is completely possible for the city, for homes.
Right. Our only step towards the natural gas component was to eliminate it completely.
Right.
Which again, we don't know what that's gonna take or how much it's gonna cost or what the feasibility of it is. And that's why we're very excited to have this funding to help us get there.
Yeah.
Have somebody that can do that
Can you
analysis.
just define net zero as opposed to,
So-
so, in the case of a ground source?
Okay, so for instance, in my home, I have solar panels, PV panels, and I have enough so that I sell back to Evergy
Sure.
in the spring, in the summer, and the fall.
Okay, so for a
And in the
given,
winter, I have to buy it
right,
because
so
I
for
don't
a
make enough.
given unit, whatever that is,
Yeah.
you're giving back as much as you're.
So I'm giving back more than I buy
Okay.
in my home. And if I have, when I get the ground source heat pump in place, then I will be using no natural gas at all because that is only run on electricity. And you can do it either with air source or ground source. And you can get net zero with ground source. You can't get net zero with
The problem,
the air source.
I mean, the problem for most homeowners is going to be cost right off the bat. It's expensive. And the problem, I think, for big facilities is it takes a heck of a lot of ground source for a big building.
Yeah. Well,
Other than that, it's a great idea, but honestly, in all the people that I know, the only people that have done it are ones that were building their own house from scratch. And they had it, they could do it right there in the beginning.
right.
Because doing it after the fact is pretty difficult.
It isn't. It really is not. So the way we're doing it is you have one hole, and it's a super hole, and you don't have to, it doesn't cost a huge amount. So there's a payback in about 7 years.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
When I looked at it, this is a different conversation, but it was
Yeah.
crazy expensive to actually
Right.
get that done.
So the payback right now is about 10 years. So it's a big investment, but in the long run, it saves money. And in the long run, it would save money for the city.
So I think I'm going to kind of pause there for this agenda item, unless you have any other questions, but we can continue to talk about all of this too. I mean, this is,
Yeah.
it's kind of probably related to agenda number 3 too, because that was going to be about, what to focus on, so.
Right.
I just want a ground source heat pump and radiant flooring, if we could get that done. I don't know if the city can help with that.
So the next item is really to decide what we want to focus on. There's a lot of things that we could do. There's a lot of KPIs. The ordinance 9744 sounds like something that we're being asked to work on.
Yes, just to
So-
be clear, the commission did say your advisory board's name, like you're going to work with,
Yeah.
Environmental Sustainability Advisory Board, so they called you out by name, and Connected City Advisory Board,
Yeah.
so.
So I think that's something that we need to make sure that's on our agenda
Mhm.
and focus on. And perhaps you could bring this up to date on what exactly they want us to do with respect to that. But then also we can work on other things.
Yeah.
And so I think what we need to do is to choose a goal that we want to focus on or two based on the strategic plan on ordinance 9744 and decide what we want to try to achieve in this coming year. So I looked through some of them. I mean, the one that we talked about before is the weed ordinance. Do we want to try to move that forward? I don't know, Kathy, is that something that the city commission would be open to, or do they pretty much say that's not where they want, the direction they want to go in with the land?
So, so in terms of what would get on the land development code update, that's kind of a done deal. Again,
it is a done
land
deal.
development code gets updated from time to time too. It's not a set in stone document, so I should clarify. But all those conversations did happen even after the former board dissolved. There were still some of those board members actively having these conversations with the consultant and planning staff. And, for the reasons that were given, all of that content did not make it into the land development code. So I guess I wouldn't think that that's a good.
Is it because they're not interested in doing that, or is it because they just didn't fit with the rest of the plan?
It's not necessarily that it didn't fit with the rest of the plan. It was an item that was brought up. There was somebody, just so you know, too, from the former Sustainability Advisory Board that was part of the steering committee of the Land Development Code group. So, and that person had brought it up from the beginning. It just was not an item that arose, to a very big priority for the group or in the comments received from the public and everybody that was engaged in the process. This is like a 2-year process, by the way, just so you all know the intensity of it. So really, what I understood from what their comments were, given to us is that the level of detail and the level of desire for the native plants and stuff, that sustainable landscaping was just not something that was at a high priority for.
Okay, so it's probably something we shouldn't try to move forward at this point.
Not for the land development code item. I think updating the noxious weed list is something that we can do as staff. That component of the request is, I think, pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Like you said, there's a lot of cities and counties that have been updating their noxious weed list, just literally eliminating it from code and saying that the noxious weed list is what the state of Kansas lists as the noxious weeds, which is the simplest, edits of what other communities have been doing. And the other aspects, I know there's other aspects to what this committee had worked on that don't fall in land development code and aren't about the noxious weed. This is about, the code with, if your grass is 12 inches tall or above, whatever action comes, from that, and they were trying to eliminate some of those parameters or change some of those parameters. So there's definitely, some work there, again, as it doesn't pertain to land development code or just the noxious weed update.
Okay.
So this, if you asked me which KPI it would move the needle on, that particular instance, and I know that the committee kind of made it say that it had all these values in these KPIs, but there's not something that's super straightforward. It's not acres of park green space per resident. It's not really acres of public land use for environmental sustainability uses, although it does have the most relevance here.
But it's not public land, it's private land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's not going to move the needle on healthy food providers by transit or energy code. That's all energy code. It's not development of infills, not transportation,
No?
then renewable energy. Miles of trails is also not what it would address, and it would not address the city's infrastructure projects.
So maybe it's better to let it lie? I don't know, what do other people think?
So just to check my understanding on this, with the weeds list situation, because I just want to verify that I'm following correctly. It sounds like the county has already or the county or the state has already come up with something, and so it would just be up to staff to kind of copy and paste and accept that language. I'm not sure if we were to, even if we decided that we did want to do something with that, I guess I don't really understand what our role would be. If it would just be aligning, just moving that over.
It's not a
Okay,
role for you.
that's why I
It's
was.
something that we can work on, yeah, as staff.
Okay, good. Then yeah, I don't think it needs to be our priority because I don't even know what our role would be.
Yeah, the other thing I will mention too is Nancy has talked about, what this board wants to select to be working on. I just would remind you all that you are a policy board. So, changing that weed list, it's not a policy that you're going to request from the commission. But just remember, whatever it is that you want to focus on for the next year, that there's a policy behind it that you're working towards to advise the commission on. So the ordinance 9744, that is a policy. The plastic bag ban, that was a policy that the former board pushed forward to commission, which, by the way, did not align with the strategic plan, but the former board, it wasn't created to align perfectly with the strategic plan. This board is. So just putting it out there. I will also mention, actually, now that I said that, sorry, I do want you all to know that there was a request for a new KPI that if approved, will fall under environmental sustainability, so I do want you to be aware. And it would be this one. It would have made that policy then very relevant to the
Actually-
strategic plan.
Yeah, that was actually, I'm glad to see that because, like, I don't know exactly how, I'm still learning how this all functions or whatever, but when I first moved here, Lawrence does have that unmistakable identity, and we have, like, you have associations with, like, the brand identity of Lawrence. And so one of the first things that I did was look into my composting options because, like, previously I'm from Olathe, and then I did my undergrad in Topeka. And so I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, but, like, I saw that Lawrence does have, like, large, yard waste, like, Christmas trees, composting, or whatever it may be. And I saw some, like, community garden projects and, like, small nonprofit organizations that did, like, small level compost. But as far as I'm aware, the city of Lawrence does not have, like, kitchen scrap composting facilities. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so if that was something that we wanted to work on, because that was one of the first things that I was kind of interested in when I was looking to apply for this, was, like, I assume that would need to be some sort of longer term capital investment. Like, we can't just get that up and running overnight, that whole specialized facility. I don't know what all that would entail, but what would that look like if we wanted to even approach?
Just to give you a little bit more of background that Nancy and Mosin I know have, but I just want you all to know too. If this KPI does get approved, and it's one that we could work on, internally we are working on this KPI in the sense of we're currently undergoing a solid waste master plan creation with a consultant. That process of RFP and selection of consultant has already happened. We are working on a scope of those services with the consultant. And really what this solid waste master plan is a lot more than just diversion of solid waste to the landfill. It, will include information about efficiency and collection and that type of stuff. But a big component of the solid waste master plan is going to be how does the city move the needle further in reducing the amount of waste that goes to the landfill. So what are those next steps? Food waste is a big one that is going to be discussed. It's going to be a process where we're going to be talking to the public about these things. We're going to be talking about to the customers, both residential and commercial. But at the end of this process, this is probably going to take about a year, 2 years, I would say. So it would really align with the work that staff is doing now. And this board could, in the process, help with creation of some policies that, you feel very passionately that would help this process.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So just to, again, check my understanding, that waste plan is going to move forward and happen regardless of whether or not this becomes a KPI. Like, the plan will still...
That is a
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, we are moving with it.
And what's the status of the current composting of kitchen stuff that we had a grant for to do a pilot project on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did have a pilot where we were accepting some food waste from one customer. It was Just Food, which is literally half a block away from our compost facility. So it was a very easy collection on taking it back over to our compost facility. That grant funding and that project ended about 2 years ago now, I feel like, 2 years.
And was there any follow-up on that?
Well, the grant reports and everything were submitted, but it was not a situation where the city felt at the moment that it would proceed to make that pilot program a permanent program.
Okay.
So it stopped. When the grant was done, we stopped the operation of receiving the food waste.
Okay.
So,
That doesn't mean
Right.
that the city isn't looking at the potential and possibility. That was just a kind of a smaller setup. If you're a community that's going to collect food waste from restaurants and grocery stores and our residential customers, you need a very big thought out plan. It takes permitting through KDHE to accomplish as well, and there's a lot more tasks of composting and keeping that facility to a acceptable level when you introduce food waste to it, and it's not just yard waste due to odor and all this.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I was not aware that there was a pilot for that, even if it, hasn't continued. How long did that pilot last, and how long ago was this?
I think it ended about 2 years ago again. Jamie Hofflin, who is a county sustainability staffer, she's the one who was lead in drafting the climate action and adaptation plan. But she got hired full-time after her, this grant paid for her position basically to work on this food waste pilot program in conjunction with the city. There was another component to the grant, which was gleaning, so she was working with farmers and making sure that, food that they were producing that usually doesn't get, packaged and put to a farmer's market, that was still collected and then sent to Just Food or other food pantries. So there was a lot of work there being done. That was the bigger part of the grant, by the way, of trying to make sure that that food did not get wasted out in the fields. And there was a lot of volunteer efforts that went into that. The smaller component of the food waste pilot, she was also kind of coordinating with the city on, and I believe it was, oh my gosh, I can bring it back to you with the correct information, but I believe it was 2 or 3 years.
Okay,
Is all it was, yeah.
thank you. And I think
And
we
I
had
can definitely provide some more information on the
Yeah.
results and stuff like
Thank you.
that. There's a report. Yeah, Chris?
Just because of time, I did want to say a big gap that I've noticed in reviewing the strategic plan is, and you flagged this in the first meeting, Kathy, there's no KPIs for the outcome of safe and secure or environmental sustainability. And there's also within the KPIs for environmental sustainability, no environmental health metrics for our community. And so from my perspective, safe and secure, I know the way it's framed, it's mostly emergency response and police metrics, but I consider a safe, healthy environment part of safe and secure. So I would love to be involved in a conversation about including some environmental health metrics for us. So I'm bringing this up because the weed ordinance on the topic of pesticides or the topic of what's going into our groundwater, what's in our homes from a lead contamination perspective, all of those things seem like part of this this board's prerogative, and I don't really see anywhere in the strategic plan where those are prioritized. So flagging that, I know that's not policy, Kathy, but it would come before conversations around policy for those environmental health metrics. So that's something that came to mind immediately when I joined the board.
Well, along those same lines, I think the ordinance where it's percent of city-used energy, natural gas / biogas that is renewable, I think it's important just to reduce it. So reduce the percentage of natural gas that's used, reduce the amount of biogas that's used. So it's reduction, not just renewable. So any other thoughts about what you'd like to focus on? I think after this discussion, the ordinance 94, well, I don't know why I can't remember, whether 77?
9744.
Clearly. Okay, got it sideways. Okay, 9477 is something we should probably put on the agenda for the next meeting.
So one thing that I'm kind of struggling with here, maybe being new and all, is I feel like there's just so much stuff going on, and it's probably all scattered all over. We have the indicators on the page we can look at, but that does not necessarily align everything, right? So I'm wondering if there's a way to get some sort of list, one maybe of all the indicators, the things that are being done, the things that the city is currently being kind of working towards, and then I think it would help in trying to say, okay, where are the deficiencies? Maybe there's still some great stuff that the city's already started, like you were talking about with like the landfill and the solid waste stuff, right? I mean, that's great. And that's maybe someplace we could focus on to complement what you all are already doing, right? And I guess I just, if there's some way to get some sort of list or something, it kind of helps give us a little more direction. I think I would be able to then like prioritize, be like, okay, now that I kind of see all these things that are going on, I actually think this is probably a big gap or where we could be doing things. So I don't know if that's possible to get something like that, or maybe something exists, maybe it doesn't, I don't know.
And just remember, I mean, we're not working on 5 or more at the same time. So the priorities, just so you know, I mean, I can pretty easily tell you kind of where we land. So we have a lot in CC 12. CC's Connected City. Well, so we are definitely right now working on this, which would be where Ordinance 9744 falls in, as well as our EECBG funding
Okay.
for our energy plan and stuff, right? Which would be energy efficiency reduction, et cetera, as well. This is part of the same one, but we're working on the fleet transition. The other one we are working on that hasn't been approved is the solid waste one, right? We're diverting material from the landfill. And then I will also mention one that we are needing some help on, which is this one. Strong welcoming neighborhoods. I mentioned this not because we're already working on some sort of a policy, but I mentioned this one because we're a little bit stuck on where to take this one. Currently, the measurement of this KPI, which is the percent of all construction above or at energy code, and it's separated out by residential, industrial, and commercial. There's a commercial up above. Currently, the way that this is measured is basically taking the year that the city adopted the energy code and just counting how many residential units have been built since that year, and how many commercial buildings have been built since that year, and how many industrial units have been built since that year. That's not a measure of environmental sustainability. That's just a measure of how many.
So that doesn't like take into account any like retrofitting, or is the retrofitting like not happening at scale or whatever to meet those new energy code standards?
It's not, it's extremely difficult to turn City Hall into a facility that goes by energy code, and the energy code is changing every couple of years. I don't know if you all know this, but currently the one that City of Lawrence has adopted is, the last one was 2018, but we're working on that 2024. There was a 2021 version, which I know the Kansas City area did adopt. The city was just skipping over to working on 2024. So every time there's a new energy code, it is even stricter, has more components than the former one. Again, so even when we first adopted an energy code, all of these facilities that were built within, the first 10 years or so aren't actually like approved for the latest energy code. Like everybody's gonna always be lagging some. I think that the concept behind this KPI was, and you can see in the strategy, is identify energy efficiency opportunities for residential, industrial, and commercial building. Energy code, forces, it's mandated, so you can't choose to follow the energy code or not when you're building right now. You have to.
Now, is that mandated for all construction or just construction for the city?
Oh, all construction. is the energy code for the, it's like, that's part of the building
So
code.
any builder right now, if they want to build something, they have to match that code.
Yes.
Yeah, which the current one is 2018. Yeah, it has to match that. So it talks about like the type of insulation, the type, like all these measures that they have to make sure that are being used. So if really truly, what we wanted to measure is, how are, not talking about city facilities here, we're talking about everybody else. So residential, commercial, industrial, all these other facilities. How do we as a community have a KPI around, the increased energy efficiency, bringing down, again, like cutting down on consumption of energy, right? And this one's not about renewable energy either. This is really truly just about how are we reducing that demand by becoming, and by the way, this would also lower the bills, the utility bills of residential customers and commercial and stuff like that. In the past, the city has had like weatherization grants and programs where it helps folks with some funding to swap out, windows or whatnot. So there's been something like that. But how do, like this KPI is like, how do we have a KPI out there that we're measuring everybody else's energy consumption, and that hopefully we're showing a trend that it's coming down. But we're still growing, but how are we making an impact for environmental sustainability by helping the community come down in their usage?
So this is really just measuring new buildings, right? Because
That's all it's doing.
all they're doing is how much new building are we doing, and Lawrence is doing very little new building.
So, yeah.
It's just not a measurement of environmental sustainability. I think the intent for this KPI was really truly there, like, like we want everybody, and if people could retrofit to be in line with the latest energy code, that would be awesome. But that's not really what's happening yet.
So one thing that strikes me, a couple of things that I think I would like to kind of work towards here. One is just looking at these KPIs here in the environmental thing. I would really like to see these separated into two groups. One, which is like city building, city stuff, which is important, versus what is community city-based. And whether that's separated on the website so people can just kind of see that. I get a little confused sometimes in looking at all these, because I think you have to kind of approach them differently. And then two, I think one of the issues is there's just old adage and a lot of stuff I do within water management and stuff. Like, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And I think there's a real lack in like measuring the true outcomes of what we want. And so if like the true outcome here is to reduce energy, somehow we've got to be able to measure per household energy across Lawrence, right? So, and then if our true outcome is to have better water quality coming out of our stormwater, well, we've got to measure water quality coming out of our stormwater. Or if we're trying to get to a better healthy environment in terms, we got to measure air pollution, right? Because then once we're making the right measurements, then we can kind of get a sense of where we're at. And then as we enact, or policies get enacted, you can then say, is that actually making a difference, right? And so it's really hard, I think, in some ways. So I would love to have one of our focuses be potentially, what are the things we actually measure? And that takes investment, right? It takes investment to do measurements or to track data. And that might be a better sort of initial setup of what we should be doing. Then we can kind of focus on, okay, this is where we're at, this is where we want to be, because it's really difficult in that sense.
So I'm glad that you're going there. As staff group, thinking out loud, we have also gone down that path of, hey, if Evergy could just give us the data, we don't own the data. Our utility company does.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to give it to us, at customer level. But could they give us the data for grouping all residential and grouping all commercial, of what the electricity use is there. And then we have data on, how big some of these facilities are, so square footage. So we were trying to figure out by square footage, like, could you do the calculation of, how much energy is being used by square footage of a residential home versus a commercial? And then, if there's that measurement, then, and we have policies in place to hopefully help the community reduce their energy consumption, then the next time we measure it, it should show, some sort of a decrease or whatnot. And we'd still have to recalculate, if we do get new facilities, getting that additional like square footage and the usage and whatnot, So we've gone that route too, and we've been trying to think about, how we can get there. It's not very easy to get data from utility companies. I'll just say that in general. So there's a little bit of a, struggle there if we could actually have what we need for that measurement. But you're completely right. I mean, we need to be able to measure it somehow to then be able to see if there's progress made.
I love the idea of data, but a little pushback on that would be, I think, Nancy, you had said earlier, the difference between measuring percentage renewable and net. Those kinds of tiny little changes are the kinds of things that, it changes the whole conversation from how much renewable energy can we bring in to actually generating energy locally. So while the problem with collection of data, and I love data, I mean, that's what I do, but the problem with collection of data is you can end up spending all your money and all your time collecting data and you don't do anything. You can also guess in some cases, especially for large, and you'll know more about this than I do, but you can model things and get reasonably close enough to make informed decisions. So my only pushback on data would just be, it's great, but you've got to do something with it,
Yeah,
and
no, and
You gotta
abs-
do something that's gonna impact it.
yes, and sometimes small, tiny little changes in wording might actually get more done than gobs of data.
Yeah, but I guess going back to this, if the whole goal in these KPIs is to show progress, you can make lots of little changes, but if you can't ever show real progress, then you're not really communicating to the community that you're doing anything, right? Like, I mean, I love the plastic bag thing, right? And removing the single-use plastic bags. But how can we go back to the community and then say, that changed this water quality, the trash, or whatever it is. And I think it will. Like, I totally agree that it will. I'm just like, if we're not measuring something to measure the impact, it's really hard to sell people on stuff, right? And
I don't know, people really didn't push back on the
Maybe
single-use
not.
plastic bag ordinance. I mean,
Yeah.
that we anticipated a lot more
Sure.
pushback and didn't really get it.
I think it's still good to like be able to brag about the wins though. Like I think it'd still be cool for like city communications to have that number. Because one thing with, I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Josh.
Josh, okay. So one thing with the past two comments that Josh has made about asking like which ones are the things that the city is prioritizing. And then also this like data question. And then kind of what Chris was saying about like how, like if methodology were on the website, kind of recentering on this topic of like what are we going to focus on, and then like providing a tangent. I think when I'm trying to decide what I would want to focus on, I'm kind of curious in what the previous iteration of the board was focusing on, and so far the example given has been like the plastic bag ban. But if we had maybe more public website information, short of me having to like go watch the past couple of years of meetings like online, I would be really interested in knowing like, is there anything that they like made progress on, 75% of the way, but like maybe we need to like finish up that project, or even with the plastic bag ban, even if it's like done and it's, that wasn't necessarily tied to the KPIs in the strategic plan, I would still want to know like if that was successful, because I'm sure there are like, I don't know, nearby like other related projects that could be focused on. So I would love to know if there was like a way that we had like a list of what they had been doing and like what their successes were as a means of like informing what we want to do.
Well, that's what I was trying to share with you, about
Okay.
what we had been doing and what was left. And the weed ordinance was the big thing that was left. And the other things we talked, I mentioned were our successes and what we had been able to accomplish in the last year.
I do think that Nancy covered all of that pretty well. I will also mention Mohsen, who was not able to be here tonight because he has a conference that he had to attend, but he has created some summary documents that he thought would be very helpful to the new board members. He was using AI this is like incredible because I read through some of his documents and they seem to really capture, those big ideas. So he was able to basically not translate, but transcribe and then create a report of all the Sustainability Advisory Board meetings from 2023 and 2024 into a 2.5-page document.
That's fantastic.
It is pretty incredible, by the way.
I couldn't open those zip
yeah.
files.
And you told me you couldn't access.
Okay.
But there's that. He also transcribed the YouTube video of my presentation. This is the one that I was like, whoa, like it even sounds better than what I was talking about. He was able to transcribe the YouTube and create a report, and it literally highlights all of those main components and even some of the comments that were brought on by the commission or the public that were summarized in this document, and it moves on to that fleet presentation. So I would be glad, like I told Nancy, I'd be glad to share all those documents with the full board, just so you can see that. I will also just comment, because I have to, this board is not directed to follow in the footsteps or follow the former Sustainability Advisory Board. The idea behind this board was to have a fresh start, and that doesn't mean you can't know what the other board was working on, or, so please don't get me wrong. It's just that this was a fresh start to really align with the strategic plan work. So just take that for what it is. We can definitely go back, and see what was done in the past, but the commission really had envisioned for these new boards to start fresh.
Can I clarify something, Kathy?
Yes.
I'm very aligned with Josh. I'm actually struggling to see how we can provide policy recommendations without some of the KPIs being adjusted to be more measurable.
Yeah.
But is one of our roles as an advisory board who is supposed to do policy, can we suggest changes in those KPIs to make them more measurable, recommend city practices such as setting up environmental monitoring equipment to be able to do that tracking? Or is it strictly try to find those gaps where policy might move the needle and that's it? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I would not tell you that you're not to look at the KPI and come up with, a better way to word it or to suggest a measurement. I would not tell you not to do that. I actually gave an example of one that I'm asking for your help to.
That's what I'm.
So I think that's on the table too. I can't tell you and promise you that the KPI will be changed and approved by the commission and all of that process. So we can work and talk about these potential enhancements to some, I guess I would call them enhancements to some of these KPIs, and see how it goes through the process. But I don't know at this point, Chris, like, to be honest, if we can add a new KPI like under safe and secure.
That's what I was curious.
That doesn't mean it's off the table for your, conversation. I wouldn't say that you couldn't talk about that in, what would make sense. Because here's the other thing, and I don't know if I've said it to you all as a new board, our strategic plan isn't something that it's going to be the exact same KPIs and measurements for the next 10 and 15 years. No. A strategic plan is supposed to be, what I've heard from the city managers, like anywhere between 3 to 5, 6 years at most type of plan. And then the community comes together to reprioritize what it is that we want to make progress in. So just kind of keep mindful of that there might be a new, or a new strategic plan, or a improved or edited strategic plan in a year or so. So that's
Yeah,
why
okay,
I want
that's
to
helpful.
encourage you to
So
still
it's-
have those conversations, Chris. I do think they're important.
So it's not just policy, but we can also make suggestions if we're all on the same page, or recommendations on how to make improvements to KPIs to make them more measurable. And it sounds like maybe even make suggestions on how to improve methodology or better tracking if we have access to that.
Yeah, and can I say something? Hopefully you think this is
Okay.
fair, but when you are going to potentially suggest, some change to the KPI and how it's being measured, that there is some sort of policy, or there's something behind it, right?
Yeah.
Not,
of course.
not just working
Okay.
through, trying to edit all these KPIs, but really like focusing on ones that you guys want to focus on. And you kind of have that idea of what would move the needle and what the measurement would need to be.
Yeah.
What's
okay.
the outcome, right? Just kind of working through all of it, not just, we're going to edit these KPIs.
Yeah, I
Okay,
got you.
awesome. I was hoping you would think that was fair.
So you would want a policy that you would put forth that would have the KPI go along with it, with a measurement, right?
Right.
And that you're going to be able to reduce or improve some aspect
Yeah.
of something within that KPI via a policy that we would like to put forth.
Yeah, that you're still thinking about what that policy would be for that KPI, yeah, absolutely.
Because the KPIs are really from the community at large. It's not just from a small group of people. It's community driven. And so I think that's really the important part of this, is that this has gotten lots of input from hundreds of people in the city. So it's really not within our purview to completely change this without further input.
Yeah.
There are some things, though, that, like Chris suggested earlier, that to state a percentage without stating how you got to the percentage, I mean, I've left that. If you throw a number out and say 48%, I've left before you even get to the number, because you're not telling me what you're doing. So the idea that you make that transparent doesn't fit within a KPI, it doesn't fit anywhere, but it's incredibly important. If you're going to measure what's the percentage of recycling in the city, do you measure that to the blue can, or do you measure that to the landfill? It's two completely different numbers depending on how you do it. If you have a power purchase agreement with Evergy, have they sold the wind farm 10 times? I mean, I don't know. And if you don't add that information, then the numbers don't mean anything. So I guess
Yeah, just
one of the
having
things that I'm struggling with a little bit is we keep saying we're constrained within the language of a KPI, and that's what we're constrained within. But some of these things we're talking about are not in that language. They're, whether it comes to measurements, or it comes to how you present the information, or how you define certain terms to try to drive psychology, it doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit within, any particular KPI. And I guess what you're saying is those things are kind of off the table. They're,
Well, what I'm hearing from Kathy is we should all understand the ethos of each of the KPIs, try to stay within them. But if we have a policy recommendation that tackles that KPI and it requires an adjustment in order to measure the success of that policy change, we can also make that recommended change to the measurement, right, Kathy? So it's like understanding what the KPI is trying to get at,
Yeah.
reduction in household energy use. Okay, what's a policy that does that? And what's a better metric
Yes.
or methodology for tracking that? And it's sending the whole package through, not just change the wording, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. You got it. Yeah. And so some of the explanation, like you mentioned, like how how's it going to be measured for the recycling and the compost and the landfill stuff. So some of it is very easy explanation. There is a standard methodology from the EPA on how you calculate a diversion rate or recycling rate for a community. So there's a whole manual behind it. And, you know, if the city adopts to follow that in how it's showing its information, then we would just state that. Others are not that simple, right? There's not a guidebook by, you know, the federal government or even the state of Kansas that tells us how we exactly measure that. So those would need a little bit more explanation. But I do appreciate, I mean, this is a great conversation, really, like even just, again, asking for clarification as to, you know, where we can go with some of these. And again, no promises, but I do think this has been, I mean, that these type of conversations would be very helpful in improving, you know, what information we are tracking, how we're tracking it, and then how we're sharing it with the public.
So I would suggest that maybe we come back and revisit this next meeting, because we've discussed it a lot, but we haven't come to any conclusions, right? So I think go back, think about it, be prepared to put forth some ideas so that we can discuss it and make some final choices. And then I think the important thing that we want to talk about is 9744 also, since we were asked to talk about that. So I would suggest maybe those two things as our focus for the next meeting, if everybody thinks that's reasonable.
Yeah. Are we gonna maybe just get a link to the ordinance that we're supposed to look at, the 9744? I'm sure I could probably find it if I dug, but it would be
Yep.
really helpful just in the email, be like, yeah, we're gonna discuss this, here's a link, so I can just click and read and be ready to discuss it more.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Awesome.
sounds good.
If anyone also needs anything else that we've talked about that you need a link to or copy of,
I'd love
you
to
can
see
always-
that AI summary of the previous meetings. I think that would be very helpful.
Mosin's files, okay?
Yeah, why don't you send that out next time, and then Mosin can talk about it too.
Yeah,
That'd be good.
yeah. Yeah.
And see if there's another format it could be sent in.
Yeah, it's a zip drive, and then when you open it up, there's literally like 30 different documents in there that he has
Right.
put together. They all are related to energy, except for like, again, some summaries of those meetings and stuff like that. So I could open up that zip drive and then send them as separate files to the board. I can attach them to the next agenda. That would be important too. So anything like that we share, we want to make sure that the public can also see those summaries and that information. So I can get that uploaded onto the next agenda, so it's also available to the public.
Great. Well, I would suggest we've covered a lot. Maybe we would like to adjourn at this point. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was interesting.